The birthday cake still smelled like vanilla when I slid it back into the fridge, the frosting slightly smudged where my daughter had dragged a finger through it earlier and laughed. The kitchen light hummed overhead, too bright for how quiet the house felt once the wrapping paper was folded away and the balloons sagged against the wall. Outside, dry leaves scraped along the sidewalk in short bursts, the sound thin and lonely. My name is Megan Caldwell. I'm 34 years old. It was the second year in a row my parents hadn't come. No call. No card. No text pretending they'd mixed up dates or lost track of time. Just absence, clean and complete, like a decision that didn't need explanation. My daughter didn't ask about them this year. That hurt more than if she had. She blew out her candles, clapped for herself and said, "It was still fun, Mom," like she was reassuring me. I've always been the reliable one. The one who keeps calendars. The one who reminds people. The one who shows up even when it's inconvenient because someone has to make things happen. I told myself my parents were busy, distracted, overwhelmed. I told myself a lot of things that night while washing plates that hadn't been used and listening to the water hit the sink too hard. A week later, my phone buzzed while I was folding laundry. The message came from my mom, casual and precise. "We need $1,600 from you. Your sister's baby shower isn't cheap." No greeting. No acknowledgement of the birthday. No apology. Just a number and an expectation. I stared at the screen long enough for the display to dim. A memory drifted in, uninvited. My mom standing in my kitchen years ago, telling me how generous I was, how lucky the family was to have someone so dependable. The praise had felt warm then. It felt hollow now. I typed a response once. Deleted it. Typed again. Deleted that too. Then I blocked them. The quiet that followed wasn't dramatic. It was immediate and strange, like stepping into a room after a loud appliance shuts off. My phone stayed still. My chest felt tight, then slowly loosened. I kept folding laundry, the smell of clean cotton grounding me. My daughter sat on the floor nearby, lining up her stuffed animals by size, humming softly. I didn't tell her what I'd done. The next morning I woke to a knock on the door. Not a polite tap. A firm, insistent knock that assumed it would be answered. I stood in the hallway, heart thudding, listening as it came again. Through the peephole I saw my parents on the porch, coats buttoned, expressions already set for conversation. My mom's mouth was tight. My dad's shoulders were stiff. They looked prepared. A memory slid in, me at 16, opening the door to them after missing curfew, already apologizing before they'd said a word. The reflex stirred now, that old urge to explain, to smooth, to make space for their discomfort. I didn't open the door. "Megan," my mom called through the wood, her voice sharp with irritation. "We know you're home." I leaned my forehead briefly against the doorframe, breathing in the faint smell of lemon cleaner from the hallway. My daughter peeked around the corner, eyes wide. "Who is it?" she whispered. "No one you need to worry about," I said, keeping my voice steady. The knocking continued, then shifted into muffled voices. My dad said my name again, louder this time. My mom added something I couldn't quite hear, the tone familiar, half demand, half disbelief. "I've always been the reliable one. The one who answers. The one who fixes things before they spill over." This time I stayed still. The house felt small in that moment, every sound amplified. The tick of the clock, my daughter's breath, the faint rattle of the porch railing as my parents shifted their weight. I wondered how it looked from the outside. Parents standing at a closed door, adult daughter inside choosing not to open it. I knelt down and met my daughter's eyes. "Go play in your room for a minute," I said gently. She hesitated, then nodded, trusting me without question. When she was gone, I straightened and faced the door again. The knocking slowed, frustration giving way to something else. Confusion maybe, or the first edge of fear. For years I'd been easy to find. Easy to ask. Easy to lean on. Standing there with the door between us, I understood something with a clarity that didn't need words. They hadn't come for her birthday. They hadn't called. They hadn't remembered. But they knew exactly where to find me when they needed money. And for the first time I wasn't answering. The knocking stopped eventually. Not because they understood, but because persistence has limits when there's nothing on the other side feeding it. I stayed where I was long after the porch fell quiet, listening for footsteps retreating down the path, for the scrape of shoes against concrete. When the silence finally settled, it felt heavy, unsettled, like the house itself was holding its breath. I waited another minute before moving. My daughter's door was closed, a thin line of light spilling out from underneath. I could hear her humming again, the tune uneven but determined. That sound anchored me. I leaned against the wall and let my shoulders drop, just a little, noticing how much effort it had taken to stand still while my instincts screamed to respond. I've always been the reliable one. Reliable people don't ignore knocks. Reliable people don't block numbers. Reliable people don't choose discomfort over familiarity. Except sometimes they do. My phone stayed quiet the rest of the day. No new messages. No voicemails. That silence carried a different weight than the one after the birthday. This one wasn't absence. It was restraint. Strategy. I knew my parents well enough to recognize it. When they didn't get immediate access, they regrouped. The next morning, the messages came from unfamiliar numbers. My aunt first, casual and probing. "Hey sweetie, your mom said there's been a misunderstanding. Everything okay?" Then my cousin. "Call your parents. They're worried." Then my dad from a work phone I didn't recognize. "We need to talk. This isn't how family handles things." I read them all without responding. A memory drifted in uninvited. My parents calling me years ago when my sister needed help covering rent, framing it as temporary, necessary, urgent. Me wiring the money without hesitation. Me telling myself I was helping the family, not enabling a pattern. Me learning later that temporary had no expiration date. I folded laundry again that afternoon, repetition calming my hands. My daughter colored at the table, tongue caught between her teeth as she concentrated. She looked up suddenly and said, "Grandma didn't come again." "No," I said carefully. "Did we do something wrong?" The question landed hard, clean, impossible to ignore. "No," I said immediately, crossing the room to kneel beside her. "You didn't. Sometimes adults make choices that aren't about us." She nodded, accepting it in the way children do, without demanding a story that makes sense to adults. She went back to coloring, drawing a sun too large for the page. Later that night, my sister texted from her number, which I hadn't blocked. "Mom says you're being dramatic. It's just money." Then seconds later, "You know how important this baby shower is." I stared at the words until they blurred. Just money. As if money hadn't been the only reason my parents remembered my address that week. As if showing up for one child and ignoring another were somehow unrelated. I typed slowly. "It's not about the money." 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Disappeared. Reappeared. Finally her reply came. "Then what is it about?" I didn't answer. Because the truth was larger than a text could hold. It was about 2 birthdays missed. About a child learning not to expect certain faces in the room. About the way obligation had replaced affection so gradually no one noticed it happening. That night I dreamed of doors. Opening them. Closing them. Standing behind them while voices called my name, each one convinced they had the right to be heard first. In the morning my parents sent an email. Subject line: "This is getting out of hand." My mom wrote about family unity. My dad wrote about respect. Neither mentioned my daughter. Neither mentioned her birthday. The $1,600 appeared twice, bolded once as if repetition could turn entitlement into reason. I deleted it. The decision surprised me with how clean it felt. I'd always believed cutting people off would feel violent, dramatic, full of guilt. Instead, it felt like stepping out of a current that had been pulling me in one direction my whole life. My legs trembled, but the ground beneath me was solid. I made dinner. We ate together. I read my daughter a story and tucked her in. She asked if her grandparents would come next year. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But we'll still celebrate." She smiled at that and rolled over, content. As I turned off the light, I realized something quietly, almost tenderly. I wasn't punishing my parents. I wasn't teaching them a lesson. I was teaching my daughter what it looks like when someone finally chooses her, even when the knock on the door sounds familiar. The following days rearranged themselves around the absence. Without the constant pull of messages and expectations, time stretched differently. Mornings felt slower. Evenings felt fuller. I noticed things I'd rushed past before. The way my daughter hummed while brushing her teeth, the squeak in the hallway floorboard, the smell of toast lingering longer than it should. Small, ordinary details took up more space once obligations stopped crowding them out. I've always been the reliable one. Reliable people don't notice how much they carry until they put it down. My parents tried again on Thursday. This time it wasn't a knock. It was a letter. I found it folded carefully in the mailbox, my name written in my mother's familiar looping script. The paper was thick, chosen deliberately, the kind she saved for important messages. I stood there longer than necessary, the metal box cool under my hand, before walking back inside. I didn't open it right away. I made lunch first. I helped my daughter with her homework. I watched her struggle with a math problem, brow furrowed, determination written all over her face. When she finally solved it, she looked up at me, eyes bright, waiting for affirmation. "You did it," I said. He grinned. That mattered more than whatever was in the envelope. When the house was quiet again, I opened the letter at the kitchen table. It smelled faintly of perfume and paper, my mother's presence compressed into an object. She wrote about how hurt she was. About how confused they'd been when I blocked them. About how families shouldn't shut doors on each other. She wrote that the baby shower was important, that money was tight, that stress made people forget things sometimes. She wrote that my daughter would understand when she was older. That line stayed with me. A memory drifted in, me at 8, sitting on my bed while my parents argued in the other room, telling myself I understood, even though no one had explained anything. Understanding had always been my job. Endurance too. There was no apology in the letter. No mention of the birthday beyond a vague reference to scheduling conflicts. The $1,600 appeared again, framed this time as a request, softened but unmistakable. I folded the letter neatly and slid it back into the envelope. That evening my father called from yet another number. I answered before I could talk myself out of it. His voice sounded tired. Older. He said they were worried about me. He said my mother was upset. He said this standoff was hurting everyone. What about her? I asked. Pause. Who? My daughter. Another pause, longer this time. She'll be okay, he said finally. Kids bounce back. I closed my eyes. She didn't bounce, I replied. She adjusted. Silence on the line. I imagined him sitting at the kitchen table, phone pressed to his ear, realizing maybe for the first time that adjustment isn't resilience. It's adaptation to disappointment. You could have just said no to the money, he said quietly. I did, I replied. You just didn't hear it because I didn't soften it. He sighed. This is extreme. I thought of my daughter blowing out candles without looking at the door. Of her not asking if grandma was coming this year. Of the way absence teaches children what to expect. No, I said. This is overdue. We ended the call without resolution. Without raised voices. Without promises. Afterward I sat alone on the couch, the house dim and quiet. Outside, rain tapped lightly against the windows, rhythmic and steady. I felt the familiar ache rise, the old pull toward reconciliation at any cost. The reflex to fix what others broke. I let it pass. I've always been the reliable one. This time I was being reliable to the right person. The next morning I returned the letter to the mailbox. Unopened. Unanswered. I didn't send it back out of spite. I sent it back because it wasn't addressed to who I am now. Later that day my sister sent one final message. Mom says you're choosing drama over family. I stared at it for a long moment before replying. I'm choosing my child over patterns. She didn't respond. That night as I tucked my daughter in, she asked if we could invite her friends over next year for her birthday. Like a lot of them, she said, smiling shyly. Absolutely, I said. We'll make it big. She closed her eyes, content, already imagining it. Standing there in the doorway, watching her drift toward sleep, I understood something clearly and without bitterness. Some families only show up when they need something. Others show up because they're needed. I knew which one I was building now. They didn't knock again. That surprised me more than anything else. Days turned into a week, then two. No porch appearances. No surprise visits. The silence settled into something steadier, less reactive. I could feel them recalculating from a distance, trying to decide whether access was worth humility. I didn't rush them. I didn't fill the gap. In the absence, my life expanded. Mornings became gentler. I stopped checking my phone reflexively, stopped bracing for the next demand disguised as concern. The house felt lighter, as if it had shed a weight it had been carrying quietly for years. Even the air seemed different, less tight, less watchful. I've always been the reliable one. And for the first time, reliability felt like peace instead of obligation. One afternoon my mother finally texted from a new number. No preamble. No explanation. Can we talk? I stared at the screen for a long moment. I thought about my daughter's birthday candles. About the unanswered calls. About the way money had always reopened doors that love alone apparently couldn't. I replied once. We can talk when the conversation includes my daughter. Minutes passed. Then hours. That evening my phone rang. It was my father. He didn't start defensive this time. He sounded quieter, unsure. He said they hadn't realized how much they'd missed. He said your mom didn't handle things well. He said family was complicated. Complicated doesn't mean careless, I replied. He asked if they could see my daughter soon. Not yet, I said. She needs consistency. Not appearances. There was a long pause. I could hear the television murmuring in the background on his end, a familiar sound from my childhood. For the first time I wasn't pulled back by it. She misses you, he said softly. So do I replied. That's not the same thing as access. We ended the call without anger. Without agreement either. But something important had shifted. I wasn't pleading to be understood. I was stating terms. The following weekend my sister's baby shower photos flooded social media. Decorations. Smiles. Gifts piled high. I wasn't tagged. My daughter wasn't mentioned. I scrolled past without flinching. Instead we went to the park. The grass was damp from an early rain, the air smelling like earth and sunscreen. My daughter ran ahead, laughing, shoes muddy within minutes. I sat on a bench, watching her climb and jump and test her limits without looking back to see who was watching. A memory drifted in, me at her age, scanning crowds for my parents' faces, learning early how absence feels in your body. I inhaled slowly and let it go. If you've ever been the one who keeps showing up while being overlooked, you know how tempting it is to keep hoping people will change if you just explain yourself better. Some families don't need explanations. They need boundaries. That night as I tucked my daughter into bed, she asked a simple question. Are Grandma and Grandpa mad at us? I chose my words carefully but not softly enough to blur the truth. They're figuring things out, I said. And so are we. She nodded, satisfied, already turning onto her side. The nightlight cast familiar shadows on the wall, steady and unthreatening. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment longer, listening to her breathing slow. I thought about what reliability really meant now. Not answering every call, not funding every celebration, not smoothing every conflict. It meant showing up where it mattered. I didn't block my parents to punish them. I blocked them to interrupt a lesson my daughter was absorbing without words. That love is optional. That money replaces presence. That being forgotten is normal. Those lessons end with me. The door they knocked on didn't open that day. And in the quiet that followed, something stronger took its place. I chose her without hesitation.